Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Beyond the Pivot. I believe that is number 10. We made it
Yes.
to episode 10. It's unbelievable. And it's all thanks to you, our audience that we have. And it's the community of now of 55 people that subscribed to our podcast. And we love to read your comments. We love to hearing from you, and we love that we can bring you some value about the African startup ecosystem, and hopefully a useful information that will also show you that Africa is just continent, but with more than 54 countries and thousands of nations and thousands of issues that are ready for solutions, and also those founders that bring those solutions to you. And as every single episode, we also bring you interesting insights, news from what's happening on the continent. And for that, I would like to ask Kabula. So, what's happening on the continent right now?
Hi, Martin. Always a pleasure to have this conversation with you. I always look forward to our sessions. In today's news, I think the biggest news is our guest, and we would be happy for you to just quickly delve into that. But would also like to let you know this week we have the Africa Tech Summit happening in Nairobi. From the previous episode, we're talking about Money Point. Some of the founders and teams from there are in Nairobi. Our own fellow as well, our previous guest is in Nairobi, and a bunch of other investors as well will be in Nairobi, Kenya this particular week. So if you're a startup, please just go to those guest list speakers, look at who's there, and look at who's interested in Africa. If you're looking for investors that you can be talking to. But for investors as well, please go to their website and we'll sure add it somewhere in the description. This is their seventh gathering that they have this year, but it's something that occurs annually. And maybe if you are interested, you could be part of it next year as well. That's it for me from a news point, Martin. So can we quickly get into the episode? Because I can't wait to just hear so much from Petra and what they're doing as a VC and also her background as an entrepreneur.
Sure, let's get to it. Let's introduce Petra and let's hear her story. Here she goes. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode. Oh, damn chords. One more time. So, hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Beyond the Pivot. Today, we have a special guest, Petra Rees from South Africa. She is, I would say, my closest Czech relative in the African continent I have. She introduced me to how the startup world works, what should I pay attention to, and she is like maybe kind of my African godmother when it comes to this scene. And I have to be thankful to Kabula for making this connection, because Kabula some time ago posted something on LinkedIn. Petra noticed it, she added me, and then we kept on in touch over the long distance, but also in a short distance while having some coffee breaks in Prague. So I would love to thank you, Petra, for making time, joining our podcast as a guest, and I know it's going to be fun. So thank you one more time.
Thank you so much for this lovely introduction. I feel like I should speak Italiano as a godmother, but I'll just stick to English.
By the way, I never knew that somehow I was connected to your guys' connection. I had totally no idea.
And also the power of, I think we're sometimes scared to put ourselves out there. And then you actually realize that, if you do, some great things happen, right? Some new doors get open. And people shouldn't be scared to approach LinkedIn people and try new connections as well. So I think it's a great example, actually, of that.
And just to ask, why do you think people are scared right there, Petra? Sorry, I know you're big on putting yourself out there on LinkedIn, but is there a reason why you think people are scared, or we are generally scared to put ourselves out there and connect?
It's a great question. I'm actually guilty as charged. I'm scared to post, just the replies that I'm going to get, and feeling like an imposter, or too bragging too much. So I think it's always that balance, right? When you know that you feeling that you're sharing something worthwhile, and having that moment to that you know that it's valuable for other people. And so I think that that's kind of the insecurity that we have, But yeah, I have to do more of that. Obviously, I clicked on your post, Camilla, so you're the one that actually should tell us how to do it better.
No, you've brought out a good insight. I mean, that imposter syndrome, I think really gets in the way for many people. But I think just getting comfortable to the point where, hey, I'm trying to add value to the ecosystem. I think for me, that's been my drive, just trying to add value to the ecosystem. Any thought, any ideas, and this podcast, by the way, that we do with Martin as well. I think bringing in amazing guests like yourselves that have done cool stuff and are continuing doing good stuff, I think gives you the confidence the more you keep doing it. And the more guests like you keep accepting our invites, I think it gives us that push to keep going.
So before you accepted our invite to our podcast, people noticed that you don't have that annoying Eastern European accent like I do anymore, and you have a nice South African one. How did you get to it? What was your journey from the Czech Republic to South Africa?
It's a great. I can pull it off if I want to, but it's my part.
Please don't. One is enough.
No, so I think I always been very intrigued about Africa since I was little. Don't ask me exactly why. I thought it was just one of the most amazing continents out there, that you still believe that you can discover something. And it always I was very attracted to it. So when I had an opportunity to accept a job at a very young age, when you don't know anything about anything, kind of in your early 20s. And I had an opportunity to actually run a small guest house in Seychelles. I jumped at it. I only knew already how to speak a few languages. So they said, yeah, you know how to speak a few languages. And I said, please, can you give me an opportunity? I would love to just try. And didn't know anything about tourism. And it just shows you that sometimes just putting your hand up, even if you don't know anything about it, but you're keen to learn, and you're keen to explore, and you're not scared too much, with the right support, with the right confidence. I'm not saying just do something completely out of the ordinary, but just, that little stretch that you're keen to explore and just actually push yourself, especially when you're young and you're a little bit more bold. That got me to Seychelles, and I stayed there and I worked there for almost 5 years. And one of my first businesses was actually a destination marketing agency, and one of my first clients were South African developers. So I had the opportunity to come to Johannesburg. I was supposed to stay here for 4 months, and almost 20 years later, I absolutely fell in love with not just with South Africa. I know that in Africa they call us Africa Light. But Cabela will probably know that term. But I fell in love.
Please, no, I do not.
I believe
Shed
that
more light, please, Petra, on that.
Africa, they call
Light.
South Africans Africa Light, because we actually just the light version of we don't know what the depth of some of the the true kind of elements that you need to deal with actually is. So that's well, there you go. So apparently something that you didn't know, Kabbalah. That's interesting there. But anyway, so I've fell in love with Africa and what it has to offer. I remember waking up and thinking there are so many opportunities. There are so many things you can do, so many people's lives you can change, so many things you can touch, and something is going to happen. And in Europe, I felt, you're a little bit more restricted. This is what you can't do. There are rules for everything. And if there's no rule there, that there will be another rule to rule the rule. So I've always felt, actually, ironically, that, I felt more free in Africa, in South Africa, than I've ever felt anywhere else in my life. And just exploring opportunities, looking out there, speaking to people, and just people are so excited. I think just like the African smile and just the willingness to just to do things. It's, you can't get it anywhere in developed world. They will tell you how it's not possible before they tell you that it is possible. And I find that working with different African countries and different opportunities, I learned so much, and I learned how to be a better person. I think overall, it just makes you a better human.
So, based on what you're saying, you have to always adapt to new people. Like you didn't know anybody when you went to Seychelles. I assume you barely knew anybody when you went to South Africa, and that story is like story of adaptation and a lot of enthusiasm, I suppose. So, what do you think like helped you in that adaptation to a completely new environment? I mean, I was just in Sierra Leone. I had 10 ideas every day, but that doesn't mean I would know how to execute on those ideas. So how did you do it? And what was your first idea that you should execute it in South
So
Africa
that's
afterwards?
a great question, because I think enthusiasm is attitude is everything, right? We hire for attitude, we look for attitude, we divorce our clients because they have the wrong attitude. So I think that exactly it's everything. So just having that that open-mindedness and willingness to learn attitude, right? They call it like everything growth mindset. I mean, the developed world is big into growth mindsets and all of these things, but it's the truthness, kind of essence of wanting to learn, explore, and wanting to adapt, hear, listen, collaborate. And actually interesting that you mentioned that, because my kind of the first business idea that came, was how do I run a business in South Africa, because I didn't know anything about the local legislation. I was like, what is this, what in terms of tax, what happens if somebody sues me? There's labor laws and all of these things. And I just thought if there was just one place that you can go to and they can help you answering those back office, if I put it, questions, and it didn't exist. So I just thought it's a great idea, and why not to start it? So I actually partnered with this lovely group of people. They ran call centers. So we my imagination was almost like that. What we know with Kabbalah is like, how do you put people in an incubation center that is typically like a physical space, right? And we kind of looked at it differently, and how to look at back in the day, which it seems so old, but it was only 15 years ago. You're talking about telephony, right? Picking up a phone. That was a scalable, real opportunity. Call centers, nowadays people go like, call centers, wasn't it a thing of the like 80s or something? So, but scaling a business on that level was a big thing back then. And now, obviously, you need to bring in other types of technologies and all of these things. But so that was actually the first business. We exited that business in 2018 to a VC, actually in Stellenbosch, which is in South Africa. And I started then a new business afterwards. So yeah, that's so the need for actually not knowing anything and anyone was a great business opportunity at the same time.
I have to say, if I had an option to call somebody, call center, like to tell me like this is what you have to do, step A, step B, step C, I would definitely appreciate it. I know I try to call the government over here, but they don't appreciate if I'm calling. So having some business like this, definitely great. And so I assume you made some money from the exit. So what did you do next? Did you start funding your startups, or maybe some other people's startups, or did you go for vacation to reward yourself?
I had children, small children actually at that time, and I just thought, why don't I do something that is a little bit allowing me to, to spend a little bit more time with them, and looking at different technologies at that time. And I was playing a lot since like 2016 with 3D printing, and seeing them, how they viewing the world at a very young age, looking at different technology like a 3D printing was a big eye opener. And because they don't have the way how we process information, right? A child was like automatically will be like, oh, but we can 3D print this, and you go like, actually we can, so that was a really great eye-opening for me to see how they saw the world through their eyes. And I just started looking more and more into 3D printing, and in general around what the options are, not for just Africa, but globally. And because one big thing that I always thought was amazing about, so I can more speak about Southern Africa. So, and specifically around South Africa, is having all this talent that is that has you have access to amazing young people doing amazing things at a fraction of the cost. Then in Europe, maybe you can go obviously India, Philippines, and so forth, but it was right here on the doorsteps. And also what's amazing about South Africa and I believe Southern Africa is the incredible market segmentation. So you have anyone from super rich to obviously also very poor, at the segment. So you can, and enough strong segments to test it, so you can test your product. So it's not just the cheaper resources that you can develop the product with, but also the product, the market, so that you can really see whether you have traction. And if you do, then you can, kind of the idea of scaling it globally. And that's what I really wanted to do. And I wanted to try it with 3D printing. I thought, the idea of Africa around small batch manufacturing was quite real and quite opportune. I think that there's a lot that we need to deal with in Africa around infrastructure that is not necessarily there. So that's why obviously, certain industries, how we leapfrogged, right? And that's why you have so much fintech, because like payments was, the banking system was non-existent. And then, we suddenly leapfrog these financial kind of constraints or financial institution constraints through technology. So the same thing, I still believe that 3D printing can really revolutionize manufacturing across Africa, because, and it offers one of those exponential opportunities where you can design something and 3D print it 1,000 times across any location in the world, really. So I really got into this 3D printing space, enjoyed it, and I thought around, where do I start that I can get the easiest traction. And education for me was probably a space that I knew that the boundaries were not as hectic as, for example, healthcare or mining, where they ask you for your DNA samples. So, education offers a little bit more easier opportunity to enter and test the product. And so we did. And I think, and it evolved from there, where we actually developed a really strong content management platform where you can literally choose anything that you want to 3D print content for teachers, for students. And that's essentially how Whiteo was born. And actually the whole concept of disruption of supply chains, then COVID happened. And I was like, you see, that's exactly what we're solving for, is the broken supply chains, and we can do this. So it actually did, the kind of the offer. And sometimes I think that's what we don't look at sometimes, that you can come up with a solution that you can test in a different industry and then pivot into where you actually want to go. So kind of knowing what your goal is, but also the easiest way how to enter that market, or how to enter that opportunity, how to test it, So it could be completely in a different industry, like education with teachers. So I knew that if I can get it right there, I then pivoting into, later on into like kind of automotive and mining, I can actually, you see that you can work with the teachers so that they can fix your problems that you have with your tech. Whereas it would be more difficult to speak to the engineers, because they would probably tell you like, please, can you go away now? You asked me for the second time. So, sometimes like those opportunities happen. And I think that, and on the, in Africa, that is so much easier to kind of move around. So without exactly like needing another regulation to go through and, another government body to have approval. So actually almost like looking at it slightly differently, still know where your Northern Star is, but testing it in a different product. So that worked for me.
And it sounds very complicated. So like big, like it's like something, I don't know, like it says like, I want to teach all South Africans to do 3D printing, kind of thing. So, and expensive. So what was your first thing? How did the pivot, you said, look like? Was it like you bought one 3D printer and put it in a school, or Like what did it look like that first prototype?
It's a
essentially?
great question, because I thought at the beginning it's going to be the classic SaaS product, right? That you're going to charge your membership fees and you're going to have your content that you're selling 3,000 times and all of that. And then as a startup, you realize that you need income from other sources. One, from selling other stuff like hardware that I didn't think about at the beginning. And what comes with actually being a reseller and, you know, selling hardware. And products around 3D printing. And the other was consulting. Actually, a lot of money, you know, for startups, how you bootstrap your business is just dirty consulting when you need to put your hours in and you kind of fulfill on your services so that you can get that check that you need, because you need the traction, and the traction is taking 6 months longer or a year longer. So yeah, it was a big, also like a big step to realize that you need to have other sources of income. And then the pivot from there, it's growing, because you need to still get the traction in the education space before you then move into another industry, right? And people want to see the proof of concept. They want to see, and then with that, as I said, you know, you're learning how to operate with hardware, how to, you know, use technicians, how to use your customers to get feedback, so that when you have other customers, bigger customers, you can actually apply it from there. So the pivot was actually not that difficult. The thing is, at the beginning, it's what's hardest is to understand, you know, how the revenue streams are coming in and how to actually still kind of chase your North Star. And not just be chasing the different streams, because now, I don't have money, so I need to do more consulting. And then before you know it, you're back into consulting. For example, or you become a reseller of a product. Meanwhile, you actually stop focusing on developing your tech. So it's a fine dance, you know, that you're doing continuously, because that's the chicken and an egg to get the right traction, right? So that either you're interesting for investors, or you interesting enough to grow and scale your business.
And Petra, I'd like to just double click on that as well, because we have guests from Europe and or different parts of the world, and they have their own perception for what technological adoption looks like in Africa, right? And right now we're talking about 3D printing with teachers in the education sector. What did that look like in terms of maybe educating your users as well, especially through that pilot stage? Or even post the pilot stage as well? What did that look like from a technological perspective, adoption perspective?
So why I love that question is that when, you know, we had we implemented everything in that education space, and you know, that whole adoption program in terms of train the trainers and having lots of other training programs for the teachers and making sure that that is going well and so forth. When we actually packaged it all together, I had actually 2 offers from European tech startup to buy our solution. And then when I actually spoke about one of the automotive industry representative in Europe to say, well, we have, you know, this content management platform that you can 3D print this part. And he looked at me and he said, but we can have that part maybe in 2 days. And I said, well, in South Africa, if you're lucky, you can have it in 6 weeks, but most likely, you know, 6 months. And then he thought about it and he said, but wow, if I actually could do it, I would do it. I just don't have the problem. But if I had that 3D printer and I could 3D print it on the spot, I would totally use it. But that, what you're saying, Camilla, was so interesting, because you could see that the aha was like, it wasn't a problem that they had in Europe, you know? And then we suddenly like, but we have the problem.
Yeah.
And they're like, but wow, I never thought about it. It's actually quite clever. I just thought to share that.
You said in the beginning that it's important to have a North Star, you know, so somewhere where you're going. And did it match, like where you were going in the beginning to what happened in the end? You know, like you just described the potential people to buy you out and teaching and going to automotive and so on. Was that all in the plan when you like set up the first like idea? This is where I'm going with?
definitely the plan, the North Star is there. You know, we went several times, 5 step backwards, sideways, different sides, all of that. But the you know, from a North Star in terms of what we envisaged that we could do, we did. The question is, for example, around you know, would the revenues, for example, from that specific product would more than, for example, from hardware, as I mentioned earlier, like you actually adding different products to your suites that we didn't necessarily thought that they would be so critical at the beginning, and we didn't necessarily pay attention to that. To actually realize that, you know, you do need to package that. You need to actually look at your structuring of your team differently, you know, with communicating to your clients differently, you know, because their pain was actually slightly different than we thought it was. So you have that idea of what it is, but then when you actually dig deep, you realize that the pain that the client has is slightly different. So you need to actually solve for the other things around it, to then, you know, make it happen, right? So because the pain, the issue was still there to be solved, but you realize that there was so much other stuff that you needed to solve for. So I think that was more of that realization around, you know, we still stuck to our one thing. It's actually interesting. I'm just reading that book again, that one thing, because it is so important. You know, you can have deviation and all of that, but you still have that one thing. And if you don't, it's okay as well. Like if you need to pivot, you need to pivot, as long as you're getting market traction, right? One shouldn't be sad about it. You should actually, you know, give yourself a high five saying, geez, I pivoted. I'm making more money actually from this product. How awesome. So, but, you know, you do need to, you know, still ask yourself, like, am I solving for that problem? And that's what I'm saying. We were still solving for the right problem. It's just that there were a lot of other little issues that were coming up.
It's just quite interesting to just see how you move from the tourism sector, right, to now 3D printers and all of this that you have going on, even the success with your first exit from your first business. And what's interesting for me is what made you now transition from being a founder to now working into venture capital?
I absolutely feel very honored to make the transition, right? Because I always thought when I started with my businesses, I always thought, yo, those guys sitting on the other side, they have it so easy. They're just making the godlike decisions.
They don't? I thought they do. What? Please tell us about it.
And so I always, like, you know, it was that Olympus, you know, where those gods are contemplating about the faith of the humans race. So no, the jokes aside, but I think that the key thing is that for me, I wanted to actually always wanted to be an investor. I always like played around even with, like, you know, angel investing and opportunities. I was a little bit scared necessarily to like invest. I was almost more like, I give you the tip, some advice from what worked for me or what didn't work for me. But then I was more and more intrigued to say, well, what if, you know, there was an opportunity where I could also be on the side of the investor and look at businesses with a lens of, you know, scaling and solving for problems in communities or for corporates. And that's really excites me. So I was very, very blessed and very honored to be able to get into the space. Absolutely love it. And I think, you know, it was actually an amazing human that actually we were part of African startup awards and all of that. And he said, you know what, the fact that you actually exited businesses will make you a better investor. So because you come with that experience, you know what it takes to be a startup, to run a tech startup, or to run a consultancy with a tech startup on an adjacency. So, and that's, to a degree, it's true, because you can put yourself in the shoes of the entrepreneur, you know, of where they are at, and you know what they're trying to do and what they're trying to solve, and you know the problems and the mistakes that you were making in kind of not being able to see the Johari window, you know, and not wanting to see it, and just by able to ask a few more questions, you can like unpack a little bit more and like actually saying, oh wow, that's now they can go that direction, and actually they can scale so much further. And so it's exciting because I think that now the 1 and 1 makes 11 for me, you know.
So do you see some mistakes that founders do the most often, but that you also did? Now you know, like retrospectively, wow, that was the mistake that everybody does,
Oh
kind of
yeah.
thing. Did you see in the pitches or when you're talking to
Yeah,
the
I think that's
founders
the
and
best
so
one.
on?
So especially as a woman, women always ask for too little. I mean, it's like it's almost like you need to set them aside and say, listen, can you like review your valuations or something, which you can't do completely, like so bluntly. Or, you know, can you like review your pricing, and can you like review your ask, for example, when you're asking for debt. Just like women are extremely conservative and extremely like risk averse around, you know, just putting it out there. And they know kind of what they're comfortable with and what they can do, and actually put it in a picture, and then they will ask for that, you know. And men will like, I think that, and then you go like, huh? And then you try to like, but because they're so far, like Trump, you know, because he makes it so far, he pushes it so far that you kind of like meet them like at a point where you didn't think even that you would. So yeah, I think that women have the tendency to definitely like almost like not necessarily undervalue, but I think that that opportunity where they can ask for more. And you know, I've made like as a even a little piece of like advice from work for me. I asked some of these ladies to say, you know what, when you come to the negotiation table, take your husband with, or take your best friend who's a man, just so that he can sit with you at the table. Because firstly, you will feel like you just put your head, you know, you're sitting with a man at a table with other men, because they are typically men in that room. So you feel a little bit more comfortable just to come in, just to start with. And secondly, it will give you an opportunity to think about it, right? Not to rush into the decisions. And sometimes actually just having someone else who can just hear and listen and have an extra pair of ears and eyes and all of that can give you that feedback. And I did it, like my husband helped me in that kind of way, where he said, no, you shouldn't be looking at it so easily. Like it was, you know, that hard work here and there. And I was like, yeah, you're right. I totally forgot about that. You know, it's like, yeah, that's a lot. Like you put a lot of effort into these things. And, you know, so just having someone who is a bit more bold and it just helps you to like just a little bit reevaluate, yeah, some of the thinking that you had, or, you know, the what it means for others, you know, like this is actually a lot what it means for these individuals, or whatever that is. Because sometimes I feel like as women, we're like, oh no, it's okay, it's fine, you know, it's just we like to share, we like to be friends. So I feel like that was you know, something that women in business in general, like when they're asking for anything, as I mentioned, even with state, or asking to sell a piece of their business or assets. And also the other thing is that often they would not wanting to see certain things as in pieces, right? So sometimes women have the tendency to say, you know, it's my baby, and there's this exact, it's like it's a whole package. And sometimes they don't necessarily recognize, you know what, everything in your business has value. A database has a value. Your newsletter has a value. You know, your clients obviously have value. We know that, but it's that relationship, you know, all of these little things. And they go like, oh, I didn't know, you know, I didn't know that actually could have value. Because sometimes they look at exiting, but they don't know how. And who to exit to, like, because, you know, we often speak about a VC and, you know, and incubators and, you know, the Y Combinator. And meanwhile, you know, an easy exit could be a competitor. It could be a company that is looking for your services, and, you know, it's an adjacency to what they do. And they actually want to grow with you or without you, depending on whether you want to exit or not. So there's so many ways how to exit. And I feel like, you know, people don't necessarily look at it. Sometimes also clinically, they're just like, oh, it's my baby, and I need to, you know, and they kind of almost like disassociate themselves from it. especially from a woman perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And Petra, just right there, I would like to also get some more context, especially for our viewers, right? So currently in your investment journey, where are you at? What's the fund size? Or what are the ticket sizes that you're investing in? The startups that you're aiming for? Is the geographical reach or focus right now just South Africa by looking at Africa as a whole? Please tell us about that before we even
No,
get into more
absolutely. So
details.
we are very much in an impact fund phase or stage of our business. So we look at working with mainly with corporates. At the moment, it's South Africa based. We are setting up our own fund that we're going to be also, scaling, not scaling necessarily, but for Africa, Southern Africa. But it's very niche and industry specific. So I'm a big believer in almost like the new generation of funds or VCs or, what it doesn't matter. I'm a big believer that the kind of the new generation that we're facing now is very industry specific. It's very niche. So for example, from our side, we're looking at industries like mining, light manufacturing, heavy manufacturing as well. With that, we're also looking at agri-processing because typically a lot of times even mines have big portions of land that, and some of our clients obviously are in the agri-processing space. And it's about, so those industries that you can really make a big difference, that we believe we can make the big difference, and really focusing on those before just trying to have a blanket approach across anyone. So at the moment, we're looking at debt primarily. And because we're dealing with some of the developmental funding, it's either interest free or interest bearing at a very affordable rates, obviously below the market rates. And we are now also obviously looking at equity. So it's very much developmental focus, impact focus, and very much in those specific industries. So we actually looking now at setting up a fund in some of the countries in Southern Africa, and again, very specific industry related. I love mining, for example, and I love energy. And I believe that specific focus is going to have the big impact on the startup and on the ecosystem in general.
So when we look at the top 10 billionaires in Africa, obviously they are involved in the traditional sectors, right? Maybe the landscape would change since we're seeing a lot more rise of startups. But it's, why that is interesting to me is we rarely now see funds that are targeted towards light manufacturing, non-tech funds almost, right? Why do you think these particular industries a lot more investors should be looking at them? Because I do know with the growing population that we have, these can be key sectors that we need to be looking at. But why the strategic focus on those sectors?
So for me, it's really the industry, the kind of the fund 2.0 that we're moving away from. I think fintech, which is exciting. I think that people realizing the potential of Africa in young population, and a population that is really educated, that is tech savvy, that can make a big difference, not just locally but internationally as well. So I think that there is that shift there. It's and it's also supported by so if you look at investing and the LPs in that space and the the institutional investors or family offices that the money that is coming from Europe or America primarily into these spaces, it's still very small in comparison to GDP, right? So Africa GDP just over 3%, and the VC space, it's like under 1% of the global, so 300 billion. So you're looking at about $2 billion from an investing point of view. So it's still disproportionate, right, in terms of that the money is coming to Africa. So where does the money going to come from? And even South Africa now, we've just been year on year, I think now it's 1/3 less than, for example, last year in terms of the investments coming in. So where would that money, the investable money, come from? And we see that a big appetite that now is kind of emerging is from, for example, the corporate sector, the private sector, that is now willing to solve for their problems, right? Some of them like collaborating more than others. But they're realizing that, and obviously government is also starting to put their agendas in, to start to kind of bringing in the right regulations, and that wasn't there 10 years ago. So, I mean, these discussions didn't happen overnight. So it's been progressively happening. So you will see that now companies are seeing more like, how can I solve for my own problems as a corporate? And where do I find the next solutions? And that's where the startup world is critical. So I think with that, though, we might see not necessarily big disruptive opportunities, right? Like it's not probably the unicorns, but it's going to be much more the sustainable growth led businesses that are, as you mentioned, for example, boring manufacturing sector, but that can be augmented with IoT, 3D printing, with the latest technologies. So it's really kind of that opportunity, and the corporates are now realizing it, that and that's why, for example, the VC as a service, it's becoming a thing, because they need to be solving for their own innovation. So they are more willing to actually come together and set up, an industry related fund that is now solving for those bigger problems that they can, because they can solve for within the industry. So I think that is definitely driving that, Kabela. And I think that you would probably know in Zambia, I know that mining, and how Zambia is positioning itself as the future hub of mining, not just mining tech, but mining solutions. Is a great example. Like, I think that, if Zambia gets it right, the amount of startups around those mining opportunities is going to be massive. And whether it can just stay in Africa, or you can scale it and bring it to South America, Australia, and etc. But I think there's enough to for startups to grow just in the African continent when it comes to, for example, mining. So that is something that I see, like, for Zambia as a great future, for the startup world, and an opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And just so you know, we at Bongo Hive, we recently partnered with UNDP, and we are implementing the MineTech program, there's a MineTech hub located in Zambia, and we're calling all African startups to be a part of this hub. So it's really in line with that strategic direction that you mentioned. And I know our president did declare that they're trying to produce now, about 3 million metric tons of copper by 2030. So there's a huge push towards seeing a lot more growth in the mining sector.
Add to that what you're saying is, and I think that finally I've also noticed that in the mining sector there's a big discussion around the beneficiation, right? That's why the manufacturing discussion now is coming in as well more, because the realization of what do we do with the product, not just exporting it, but what can we do locally? It's it's no longer a question like what I've picked up when I came to Africa some 20 odd years ago. It's like, okay, so what are the opportunities? And people are backing it. People are backing the beneficiation, localization components behind it. So it's really just getting the corporates and the government start putting these things together and starting to putting these funds together. And I think it's just so many awesome opportunities going to come from there.
100%.
What are the corporates mostly coming from? Are they come from Europe, America, or Australia, or is it just like, Germany, like that's the place, or is it all over the place?
So corporates mainly growing so we see, for example, from South Africa, local corporates, so the local mines. Obviously, mines get always new investors. The Chinese obviously coming as well into the mining space. So from that point of view, it's local, old kind of businesses that have been there growing, and obviously new incomers into the market. When it comes to corporates from like Europe or others, I don't necessarily mean that. I think it's more for the local use, right, at the moment. So that's where we see the most amount of funding and discussion is coming from, to say, okay, we are willing, and there's how much money we can contribute towards that. So from countries like, for example, Germany and so forth, we're seeing more around how can we utilize some of the resources to be upskilled in that industry, which is fantastic. We're just hoping that they can stay in Africa, not maybe move away, because it's obviously difficult if you're upskilled and you have an opportunity to stay maybe, in places like Germany, get attractive. So we need those resources to come back and do more here. But I think the fact that they coming and they putting together upskilling programs, technical upskilling programs is fantastic, and we need that, right? We need the training programs to happen at the same time.
I can imagine that the old companies in South Africa have to have kind of different mindset than a venture capitalist. Is it kind of hard to match those two mindsets together so they understand that they can lose the money, but also they can make the money, and what it actually means to invest and so on?
No, great question, right? So I think that in a number of cases, they still obviously will do their mergers and acquisition journey that they always had on the bigger scale scheme of things. But I think that they are more and more open now to startups solving for some of these problems that they ever had before, because they're realizing that they can fall over. And if it wasn't for these like quick, nimble, agile solutions, they will be out and they will, no longer be around. So they're realizing it, which is fantastic, because everything is moving at a faster speed than 20 years ago. 20 years ago, you knock on the doors and they're like, why are you here? And don't bother us. Now it's like, oh, please, we have this problem. Do you have any startup that can actually solve this problem? So the operations are more open to say, we can do a POC. We can look at a small contract to start with. Please, can you actually have somebody to help us with that? They're also more open to look at, for example, their existing service provider, to be able to access other IP globally. And how do you support them? And the good news is that they know they can't do it in a corporate structure. That's why they are now more happier to actually put it outside and to an outside structure with someone that actually understands startups and VC. So I think that because they failed, it's a perfect timing. If you ask this question about 5 years ago or 10 years ago, I would say, geez, they're not ready. And now we see just how ready they are. They are even RFPs coming out for VC as a service, where this used to be called venture clienting and venturing, and you had the Deloittes and Accenture and all the expensive firms before giving them the tips and all the new innovation strategies. And now they're like, okay, we can actually do it with these guys, because these guys know how to invest in companies and how to work with startups, because they have the support structure of mentorship and support, and actually working with them, bringing them into other value chains. So these guys know how they're doing. So why don't we partner with them? We put our operations team to tell them exactly what the problem is, and they can solve it for us. And it's not going to cost us any heavy consulting fees. So I'm not saying that it's not important, still, the big strategy and innovation. Of course it is, because you need to do mindset change and all of that. But I think that we see definitely now of that appetite coming directly.
Yeah, I feel like it goes back to what you said, that exits can be easy, and that you can also sell to your biggest competitor right away and so on. So I feel like this makes it easy for startups that are funded by the giant corporate there to get exit, because the corporate is going to buy them. So it's kind of win-win in the end. But as every fund is made to make money and also impact, right? How hard it is actually to achieve these exits. I know you said it can be easy, but is it actually difficult to achieve exit in South Africa, perhaps in the SADC region?
It's a big one, right? Because that's where you need to start. And that's why there is not enough VC money, because you don't have IPOs happening at that level that you have anywhere else in the world. So exit is something that you do need to start with, and knowing that company, for example, can be bought by the corporate, and you know what, and that's okay, right? So if you know that, for example, the exit for that is that for the corporates to absorb that startup, and in a number of cases, it's a double-edged sword, because by actually them absorbing it, they can kill it, right? Because and I've seen one case before where actually they literally put the IP into the drawer so that the competitor couldn't get it, and they never done anything with the startup at all afterwards. It was like, thank you, there it is, money over, and we're never going to use it. So, but it was exception. I think in most cases it's more around how does the startup, as I said, solving for their problems, right? So, and that scaling in there is difficult on its own, because it will be only possible for that and not probably for the competitor. So as I said, it's a double-edged sword, but there is nothing wrong with it. If the money is coming from there, let's give them the right solution, because it's a win-win for everyone. I think we shouldn't be looking at it with an American VC lens. We need the disruption and we need to exit and big unicorn. I think there's just so much opportunity that we really can just sell to the corporates, and it's great. And it's going to create so many jobs and solve so many problems that, we haven't even thought about. And that's fantastic.
I think in the beginning of one of the episodes, I heard that there are no unicorns in Africa. It's more gazelles and camels. And I like that it has to be functioning business, and it doesn't aspire to be, you said, IPO disruption. It's actually solving something, being viable, and then some bigger company is going to buy it. And for most of people, it's life-changing money. They don't care where the money comes from, and the impact they do is greater because it happens in that particular region than somewhere in an IPO in New York or somewhere else. So where do you think the most people make the mistakes of aspiring too big, or not even thinking that the corporate is the option?
I think that really, I don't think that people make mistakes. I think that people try really hard. It's often the networks, right? And having enough market traction to get the POC. I think that's what we're fighting for, and fighting with the most, is to make sure that the corporates open their doors, allow these companies to come in and run a POC. A proof of concept, or a little contract, or just show them what they can do. Is that that's essentially the biggest problem, right? Is that these smaller startups can't prove, because they don't have the big cloud and 100 people in their back office to quickly solve all of these problems. So I think that, just it's having that access to network. So I think that, going and having those opportunities like Bongo Hive, and actually being able to plug them into these opportunities, into these value chains. And that's where the likes of Endeavors and all of them, when you look at how they're going about plugging into value chains, that's really where it works really well. It's the opening the door, is to say, I know this guy, to know that guy, please, can you just give them a chance and have a look at the opportunity. So it's having that access to a network that is, that can allow for that, and having enough market traction to prove that you can obviously do a small proof of concept. And it's always those stakeholders. So it's being able to really, and we always say, look at other partnerships, look at the likes of Deloitte, PwC, KPMG, Accenture, because they have access to these clients and they know what problems they have. So, open up those discussion, open up those networks, because they can probably, if they can prove it with you, and you kind of show enough that you can demonstrate enough that you can do X, Y, and Z, they will vouch for you, because they also want to shine in front of their client. Right. So there's different ways, and really just being able to go out there, explore, broaden your networks is key. That's, I always say, be part of a entrepreneurs group, entrepreneurs network. It's critical to actually get anywhere. And I think that's where often people say, I tried, I couldn't, the corporate didn't give me the work, they couldn't. Yeah, obviously it's not as easy. So how did you go about it? So where did you look at even, doing certain things, maybe at a discounted rate or at no cost, just to get that that door opened. So it's not necessarily that people would make a mistake. I think people give up easily sometimes. It's just a little bit too hard. I don't know the people. I don't know how to position it. That's why we need the Bongo Hives to professionalize it, to make it amazing. People don't have time to read, like, where's your pitch? Where's your thing? Where is it amazing? Don't want to hear your technical story. That's fantastic. We assume you have that, right? So what problem are you solving? How are you going about it? I think that's just the most critical things.
I think you were touching on something quite important there, and also ties into what Martin was mentioning, the aspect of these camels that we have, right? Describing startups. And for those that maybe don't even understand the concept of these camels as a description of startups, as you think about it, the camel itself will go in places where very few animals would go, right? Very harsh conditions in the desert. So maybe another follow-up question, Petra, would be how you go about finding these particular camels, right? I know you spoke a bit about the pipeline hubs and that, because I think, again, just adding to the description of the camels, you will see that even from your story, in that very beginning, you had to make sure that you find all of these resources to just make sure you have the lifeblood of the business, which is cash flow, right? So you're doing consultancy, you're doing some grants maybe here, a luxury that this is an activity that every African startup gets through, but other startups in different markets don't even get the opportunity, right? Or at least they have access to funding. Let me say that they have access to funding and they wouldn't understand what a startup needs to go through. But to cut my question short, how do you go about identifying these resilient startups that you potentially would be working with?
You need to, I mean, at the end of the day, who you backing, what you backing. I mean, you're backing an amazing entrepreneur who is resilient, who has a great idea, who maybe is the technical brain as well, or has technical brains that are there with him, that they know how to solve that problem. That's actually all you have. You really don't have their houses, you don't have their cars. You don't want that. It's not that you want. So that's all you've got. And that's and typically knowing their journey is so important, right? That's why people say, like, for example, if you exited once, you probably can raise again, because people, you have that story. And even if you failed in between, it's actually adding to that, to the spice into it. So really kind of walking the journey and understanding, how that person is performing, even at the level of, for example, an incubator. And that's comes from Bongo Hive to actually say, this, and you know that. I mean, you go, you pick up the phone. Oh my goodness, there's this person that I met that you need to see, and they have this. But it's the person, right? And it's the team that you met, and then only you're talking about the idea. You never start with like, oh my goodness, there's this incredible IP that I came across. You first starting with the people that are behind it, and then because you obviously know them, you walk the journey, and I think that's what what typically comes from, is understanding the background, understanding how they where they and the journey you walked with them, for example, Kabila, right, and your team walked with them, so they can say this, that, and so forth. So there is some form of history. So it could be also an employee that is, of a corporate that we spoke about, that, for example, now, wanting to actually do their own thing, have their own business, because they couldn't get the idea across in the business. And now they're like, but I actually now want to go on my own and actually do that for others. And again, there's a history, right, that you can say, how did that person, perform in the business? Otherwise, the business wouldn't give him a chance. So there's a referral. So it doesn't come from a radio station typically. It's a referral that then afterwards has a story. But we always run bid windows, so it's a very so you can get obviously people coming from a radio station, if I put it this way. But even then, in those interviews and etc., you need to learn about them. And you need to, hear their story. So it's very much the ecosystem. So it's the people from the ecosystem, is somebody who worked with them in the past, mentors that we work with. So yeah, it's a whole range. As I mentioned, then we do obviously run bid windows. So it's a very fair process at the end of the day. That we're looking for people who know how to package the information, but they learn how to package it because of, for example, Bongo Hive, right? So at the end of the day, it comes back to the great work of the incubators.
And Petra, so when people want to talk to you, what should they talk to you about? Like, what do you want to approach you with?
No, wonderful. So as I said, we are very much in sectors that are around that mining, light manufacturing, heavy manufacturing. Somebody with that comes a lot as well. Recycling, of course, opportunities within these sectors, agri-processing. So if anybody is in this space and has a solution for the industry, I would love to get in touch with them. Please email me, petra@kaiconnect.co.za. And I'm really keen to hear from, as I mentioned, we have different opportunities throughout the year. We're also looking at raising, as I mentioned, we're raising our own fund in the process. So we want to see the pipeline. So I'm very excited about that as well. And there's more to come. I mean, we bunch of individuals that we're new as a fund manager, essentially, but we people with experience that have been around already for some time. And that's what's exciting about us, is that we really want to see the impact, more than anything else. We want to see the solutions, how they can solve for the problems of, the Mother Earth, communities, not just the corporates, because that's a given, but really how people can pass it on, how we can actually make this place a better place. That's all what it is about.
That's very hard to follow with anything else. You said it all. We all try to make even our city, even our community a bit better with the help of, I would say, disruptive people that are not happy with how things run right now. So if anybody is there listening to us that would like to talk to Petra and be connected to more opportunities, and before that be trained by Capvela and his team how to do it, please don't hesitate and reach out to Petra. We'll put her contact information into the description, according to the websites and her LinkedIn profile if she allows. And I cannot wait for all the connections we'll talk about next year that happened, or all the stuff that happened. So I would like to thank you very much, Petra, for sharing with us, for talking to us over an hour. And I have to say, I learned a lot.
No, thank you again. Thank you, Martin. I was a lot talking to Cabela, so I didn't mean to kind of always say, but right, Cabela, right? But he just has the advantage of just having such an incredible, I mean, Bongo High for me, even 15 years ago, was like a aspiration. So when I actually met Cabela in person in Nairobi, I was like, oh my goodness, I was dreaming about Bongo High, the North Star of incubators. So they're doing an amazing work. It's really companies, and with his passion, it's just, that's what counts, right?
Thank
so
you.
I didn't mean to skip you, Martin. You're doing a fantastic. I cannot actually believe that somebody from the Czech Republic is interested in making, the ecosystem, the African entrepreneurial ecosystem data, that actually understands it so well already. I usually come across things like, so, the fact that you're like, why I'm here and it's exciting and I want to do more, it's just unbelievable. So I thank you, because I think that you're bringing another layer of that network, that making things better through collaboration is possible. So thank you so much. Please doing more what you're doing. So I can't wait. But Cabela, he's just a legend that we just, that kind of just historical. He has that advantage.
Don't worry, Petra, I'm used to it. Everybody just talks to Capvela because he's the legend, he's the great one. I'm just here.
Great to have you, Petra, and we thank you for your time. Thank you so much for making it to the end of the podcast. As always, we really appreciate that you're always tuning in, learning about the different ecosystems across the continent, what's happening in the investment landscape, and also in the entrepreneurship landscape. Today, our guest was just super amazing, Petra, and we've learned so much, so many insights shared in VC as a service that they get to provide, which is an amazing concept, plugging into these value chains of larger organizations and how they are working with startups to solve some of their pertinent problems within their value chains. Great opportunity. Also talking about entrepreneurship, Petra's journey as well, from just being a founder to making her first exit to now an investor. So we hope you enjoyed the episode, and we hope that you will see the next episode that we have for you with another exciting guest.
Thank you, Capvela, very much for the summarization of the interview. I have to say I enjoyed it. Petra is a joy to talk to. And if you would like to hear on our podcast somebody you like, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can find me, Martin Vítek, on LinkedIn, just like you can find Capvela Malupande on LinkedIn. So don't be afraid to reach out, or just leave a comment under one of our YouTube episodes or Spotify episodes or Apple Podcasts or whatever application you get your podcast from. We are looking forward very much to talk to you soon, and we cannot wait to read your comments. And have a great day.